Good morning. Today is September 25th, 2025, and we're here in McKenna Hall on the University of Notre Dame campus. My name is Karla Yaritza Maravilla Zaragoza, an English Ph.D. student at the University of Notre Dame, and I'm here with the lovely poet Brenda Cárdenas, who has published ekphrastic and multilingual poems in her two poetry collections, Boomerang and Trace. She has also been published in literary magazines and anthologies, most recently in Latino Poetry, the Library of America Anthology. Besides being published in them, though, Cárdenas has also co-edited two anthologies, including Resist Much, Obey Little, inaugural poems to the resistance. She is also a Letras Latinas affiliate sweetheart, having co-designed and co-taught the inaugural master workshop for Pintura Palabra, a multi-year Letras Latinas initiative in partnership with the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Fabulous, fabulous. But most importantly, she is Professor Emerita of English at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, where she taught undergraduate and graduate classes and seminars on poetry and the visual arts. She currently serves as the Wisconsin State Poet Laureate. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love visiting Notre Dame because you have, I think one of the kindest campus communities I've ever encountered.
No, that means a lot to me too.
Yes.
Because I did not expect Notre Dame to be so welcoming.
Yes, welcoming, people are helpful. People tend to be, I feel like, for the most part, cheerful.
Oh,
And
yes.
yeah.
No, the students here make coming to work here so fantastic every
Mhm.
day. But, okay. My task today is to conduct this interview, which will be archived as part of the Letras Latinas Oral History Project, available for current and future poets and scholars to study and find inspiration. My interviews are usually cut in half, so we have the first half and the second half. This first half, we're going to kind of look at your origins as a poet, but more specifically, we're going to hone in on your origins with ekphrasis.
Okay.
So, my first question. In the introduction that I gave you yesterday at the Raglan Murphy Museum of Art, I admitted that I once thought that ekphrasis was a crutch for poets who lacked imagination in their poetry.
Mhm.
I now understand that ekphrasis can be a transformative, interpretive process between the spatial and the temporal.
Mhm.
What first drew you to ekphrasis, and what possibilities did you see in it that maybe someone like me missed at first?
Well, I'd have to go way back in terms of first, I think, one isn't going to write in that mode unless one is a great appreciator of visual art. And I think for me, that appreciation goes way back to childhood in the sense that I had an uncle who was a visual artist. He actually was trained in the army when during the Korean War, and he was a commercial artist for his living. But he, for in his free time, he could paint and boy, detail oriented stuff that every little realist, every little detail in there. And then my father worked in a factory. I mean, he never called himself a visual artist. He eventually moved up into computers when they first came out, but he could also draw. Like we would ask him, "Dad, draw this musician I love," and he would be able to do the likeness exactly. It would look just like the album cover, right? And I had cousins who did. One of them was rode rodeo, so he actually broke every bone in his body multiple times doing bucking broncos. But he also did the leather tooling on chaps and saddles,
Huh.
beautiful detailed leather tooling. I had another cousin who was a leather worker. I had another one who's a fine furniture maker, and it's just absolutely beautiful. None of them did this as a living. None of them would have walked out into the world and said, except maybe my uncle, "I'm an artist," right? There was that creativity there. And I grew up in a home where I had, it was multi, 2 levels, and my aunt and uncle were in it with me, and my aunt was incredibly creative. So we were always doing they were more like crafts, not like kits, like of her own imagination, reusing things to make a craft. And so I was always doing something visual. And she was also she wasn't a trained tailor, but she could sew like you wouldn't believe, and would make three-piece suits out of the remnants they were being thrown away that my uncle brought home from the, fabric store. where he had worked as an electrician, you know? And so I grew up with it around me all the time, this creativity. And that made me really fall in love with art. We didn't go to art museums when I was a kid, but as I grew up, I started and just really developed this great appreciation for the visual arts. Now, writing poetry that is in conversation with visual art or inspired by it, I think I knew a lot about the mode when I first started. Oh, I know what it was. It was living when I lived in Pilsen, and this was, I mean, about 1998 to about 2005. And Pilsen in Chicago, a neighborhood in Chicago that was at that time filled with artists. And and I was working for the National Museum of Mexican Art. And I got to know all of these artists, they became friends, and then it just felt natural. You know, I would go into their studios and they would be painting something, they would have their work all over the walls. And, you know, I knew them so I could have conversations with them about it. And then I just felt like I need to write. I need to write in conversation with this. And so I think that was a big part of it. I even before though that I was doing some of it, but I think, you know, working for an art museum and being around art and artists all the time really had an impact on making me want to do more. That's when I started to study the mode and look at what scholars had to say about it, what artists had to say about it, what other poets had to say about it. And that's when I developed my kind of deeper knowledge of ekphrasis.
No, like, from your response, I'm, like, looking back on my own life, and I was like, I grew up in a family of artists too. Not necessarily in the same way that your family did. My dad only recently has, like, become, like, a carpenter, and he makes
Uh-huh.
tortilleras, and he's making all these, like, mattress frames and everything, and it's
Uh-huh.
really beautiful, the things that he's making. But, like, when I grew up, all my cousins knew how to draw, even my sister.
Wow.
I knew how to draw too, but I only drew Pokemon because that's what I would
Uh-huh.
see on TV. I would go outside and I'd grab these rocks that worked like chalk, and I would go on the driveway and I would just draw Pikachu over and over and over again. But I wasn't as good as my cousins or as my siblings who could,
Yeah.
like, actually draw people and
Uh-huh.
draw eyes, and they would even go so far as to draw Dragon Ball characters and
Uh-huh.
frame them on the walls in their
Wow.
house. And
Wow.
so I think maybe, like, my distancing with art had to do with my own envy.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I wanted to be able to draw Pikachu the way he moved on the frame. And, it's been fantastic reading your work and getting back into, like, appreciating the arts and maybe
Uh-huh.
even attempting to draw the way my family draws. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Before ekphrasis, though, there was obviously poets and writers that influenced your writing or
Mhm.
influenced your journey as a poetess. Could you name a few that you found influential to your work and your development?
I early on, I probably really started writing poetry in high school.
Mm.
It was awful poetry, but that's when I started. And you know, back then, I was saying this in a conversation the other night. In our literature classes, there was not hardly any diversity in the literature. Like in an American literature class, about as diverse as it got was Gwendolyn Brooks and Langston Hughes, if we were lucky. But I loved Gwendolyn Brooks and Langston Hughes, and you know, I also loved Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, who are very different, right? But I was loving my literature classes. And so I would say very early influences were probably Gwendolyn Brooks, Langston Hughes, Walt Whitman, maybe more than Dickinson in terms of my own style, although I appreciated what she was doing. And even other writers like Henry David Thoreau, because I love being in the natural world. And so that was, you know, inspirational. But then then as I, you know, got out of high school and I was in college, even in college, the curriculum wasn't very diverse. But along the way, I somehow got my hands on Lorna de Cervantes, who is, you know, a Chicana poet. And when I started reading her work, I was, whoa, wow. Also, Alyorista, right? And Alyorista was writing. Lorna D used a little bit of Spanish with her English, but she mostly wrote in English, whereas Alyorista was writing in English, Spanish, and Nahuatl, code switching. And so I really fell in love with those poets, and they were kind of gave me permission to write about my own culture, my own identity, and mixed languages and all of that, right? And so they were very influential early on. And then more time as time passed, Juan Felipe Herrera. Juan Felipe Herrera is still to this day one of my very favorite poets of all poets. And I read very widely. I mean, I read a lot of, Latine poets, but I read a lot of poets of all different backgrounds. And Juan Felipe Herrera is still one of those at the very top. And for me, and I think it's because he is so inventive. First of all, he's so prolific. What does he have? 35 books or something, but he's also so inventive as a poet and was doing things no one else was doing at the time, even in his early work. And he has a whole book of ekphrastic poetry, responding to or in conversation with the Prince of Artemio Rodriguez. It's called like Loteria Cards. No, Loteria something and Fortune. I can't remember the whole title. Loteria something and Fortune Cards, a Book of Lives. And it's Rodriguez's print, Juan Felipe's poem. Rodriguez's print, Juan Felipe's poem. And, that's one of my favorite books of his. I've taught that book many, many times. It's a beautiful book too. It's a hardcover small book.
Oh,
That's
oh, it's
free.
small.
Yeah, it's a City
Okay.
Lights book, so it's that pocketbook size, but much thicker and hardcover and gorgeous paper. So it's just a beautiful object as well as, and he's always been an influence on me in terms of thinking about, what else can I do in poetry that's new or different? How can I say this in a way it's never been said? And he's also just one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. Just a lovely human being, can relate to all ages. I've seen him just wow a crowd of little kids, and when I brought him to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, there were families, lots of families came, and there were children in the audience around me. And at one point, this little girl in front of me was dancing to his poetry.
Right.
This is Juan Felipe, right? He's magic. So that is a big influence. But also, I've mentioned the poet Craig Santos Perez. Now, I think there's nobody who knows how to put a book together like him or write a series of poems. And he writes work that is socially political, socio-political, relevant in those ways, but is not the kind of poem that's up in your face, kind of preaching at you at all. Because I don't think that really works, right? To change minds. So I really love his work. And there are so many more. There are so many more, but we would be here all day. Really?
Yeah.
Just talking about influential poets, and so I'll
Yeah, no,
stop there.
I'm very happy I asked you this question. I mean, it is my job as like an interviewee to kind of get
Yeah.
to the root of what influence and what made you who you are, but it's also a very selfish question because I'm
Uh,
looking for more recommendations.
oh, oh, and I have to say, I also really love the work of Cecilia Vicuña.
Oh, yes,
Um,
yes. Oh, she
and
was here recently.
Yeah.
Mhm.
She was, because earlier, I did a lot of kind of performance art as well, and not in her style, but still, like, the way she is a performance artist, she is a visual artist, and she is a poet, has always spoken to me. Her books, the way she'll do something out in the natural world, she'll photograph it, and then she has these, like, strings of text. I've always wanted to do something like that.
Mhm. Yeah.
So yeah, she's another influence. Mhm.
I'm learning that we have another commonality. I also did performance poetry a lot.
Ah,
I've performed in, oddly enough, museums, conferences. Those are the
yeah.
two places. But I don't do performance poetry in the way that other poets do it, where they kind of like make the language more experimental and textile.
Uh-huh.
I like to be an actress. I will
Ah,
dress up as a priest with a
uh-huh.
mustache and everything. And I will
Wow.
like read these poems that kind of act as sermons. And then I take off my robes. I'm a curandera, and I start like speaking in poetry that's about nature and healing. And yeah, no,
Oh,
I go
I
crazy.
wanna see that. I want to see
I
that.
may do it next semester. I'm attempting to bring a curandera and a poet to kind of speak in conversation. And that poet is
Oh,
actually my mentor. who I do a lot of performance poetry with. And so that may happen. And if it does, I will record it and I will send it to you.
Oh, I would love that. You maybe identified last night then a little bit with the poem I read, that went with the, Guillermo Gomez Peña, that performance art. Yeah, I mean,
No, when you
yeah,
changed your voice,
yeah.
I was shocked, but I was very deeply impressed. No,
Uh-huh.
that was fantastic. And on the topic back to like artwork and performance, you've written in response to the artwork of some really well-known artists, like
Mhm,
Ana Mendieta,
mhm,
whose photography and artwork, as I know it, challenges gender and identity in ways that resonate deeply with a lot of viewers.
mhm,
And I also noticed that you've written in response to Charles Bojorquez, whose Cholo-inspired calligraphy street art in the 60s and the 70s in
mhm,
California. It's made him be known as the godfather of West Coast graffiti, which is
mhm,
fantastic.
mhm, mhm,
Um, you don't seem to restrict yourself to just well-known artists, though, which I thought was really interesting.
mhm,
You write in response to local artists a lot in the state of Wisconsin, but
mhm,
you also write in response to artists that aren't really as well known, just like
mhm,
Eric Ricardo de Luna Henal's Loteria imprints.
mhm.
So I wanted to know, what do you look for when choosing an artwork to enter into dialogue with?
It's something that usually it's that the artwork, I see it, I, like, almost immediately become immersed in it, I wanna sit with it for a long time, and when I leave it, it won't let me go, right? I keep thinking about it, it keeps coming back, and that I keep thinking about it either because I'm just so wowed by it or because there was something intriguing, something mysterious about it that I haven't quite wrapped my brain around yet. So I want to think more about it. And sometimes it's like you say, it's a wide range of artists and a wide range of media that I'm in conversation with. But one kind of art that I really love is art that's ephemeral. So when you mention Ana Mendieta, many of her pieces, some of her pieces, well, all of them really are ephemeral. They will, she's kind of drawing or carving in the sand or
Mm.
the side of a hill, and the rains will eventually wash that away and it will be gone. Or she, puts her own body, like that tree of life or
Oh, yes, the
painting where
fantastic one.
she's covered in mud up against the tree and she'll eventually walk away, wash the mud off, and it will just be the tree. So I also read last night a piece inspired by Roy Stab, who's a Milwaukee ephemeral artist who again works with the plants from the area where he's building the piece, and it's created out of reeds or some kind of branches or sticks, and they're beautiful, like geometric figures. They're large. You can walk inside of them, but they will disappear. That he doesn't take a show down. It just dissolves. It just disintegrates. And I think I'm interested in that because I'm just always been really interested in the ephemeral, which to me also relates to transformation and relates to these liminal spaces in between. And I've always been drawn to those concepts. Why? I mean, maybe because as Mexican Americans, we sort of exist in a kind of a liminal space, right? And a hybrid space. And I think those spaces are so rich with potential. The notion of, I mean, I guess maybe all human beings are sort of drawn to transformation, right? That I mean, people have all different kinds of beliefs about what happens when they die, right? How are their bodies and their spirits, and their souls, whatever one believes, transformed. So there's kind of a natural human inclination toward that. But I also think a lot about the natural world of which we're part and the way in which things within the natural world transform into other things. So I always say to my relatives, my husband, when I die, do not you dare put me in a box. Do not you, I want a green burial.
Oh.
I don't want to be in anything more than a shroud. And you put me in the ground, and I want to become mushrooms. I want to become whatever it is that feeds plants that then grow. And so I tell him, you put me in a box I will come back and haunt you. You know, so yeah, so
Oh
yeah.
gosh. I mean, I can agree with you on multiple levels, but that sentiment, don't put me in a box.
Yeah, yeah, right? Or you think about, one of the poems I've written that has seemed to be, for some reason, my most popular poem.
Mm,
It's in Boomerang. It's called Zakon
yes.
and it refers to the monarch butterfly, and that's the Nahuatl word for it. And, of course, they go through not only transformation as all butterflies do, but that migration from those oyamel trees in Michoacan all the way to Canada. And it takes multiple generations to make that journey there and back. And I'm just so drawn to things like that. So
Oh
I
my
hope
gosh.
that answers.
No, no,
Mm.
you did that's a beautiful response to my question. And it just made me think about how my mom wanted to name me like Butterfly, but like we
Oh,
don't really have the indigenous roots to like she didn't want to like appropriate anything.
uh-huh.
And so she called me Yaritza, which apparently also has an etymology towards like meaning small butterfly.
Mhm.
And it's so ironic because I'm afraid of butterflies. I'm deathly afraid of butterflies.
Really?
Ever since I found out that when there's like no nectar, no like natural like food resource for them to kind of to grab onto in emergencies, they can like drink the blood of corpses.
Oh,
I did
oh.
not know that, and when I saw it in real life one time, I actually did with monarchs. It was scary. I
Ah.
and then I live in Washington State, so in elementary school they invited us to go to this museum in Seattle that had like monarch butterflies in this
Oh.
giant room. I told my parents, I'm giving you the permission slip form. Pretend like you did not see it. Put it under
Oh.
the fridge.
Mhm.
I'm not going to be put in a room filled with butterflies.
Oh my goodness. And see, I think it's great that they feed off the corpses. I think that's wonderful,
No,
right?
I actually think
Because
that's really a beautiful image, actually, when you think
something's
about it.
giving life to something else, and that's what I appreciate it, but I can also understand how it would feel very vampiric.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
But, now, talking about monarch butterflies and the fact that they migrate
Yeah.
and that they have, like, this natural response to migration, I also wanna talk about place with you, because your
Mhm.
poetry is deeply situated in place. It
Mhm.
means, covering Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Chicago, Illinois, and the Midwest more broadly,
Mhm.
but also to places outside of the United States like Chiapas, Mexico, and to
Mhm.
Korea, which I was
Mhm.
shocked by. And, how does place enter into your multilingual and ekphrastic practice?
Boy, that's a question. That's a good question. I'm just, ugh, I guess, I don't know, my answer is gonna be kind of blah, but I mean, we exist in place. I mean, we exist and well, I think a lot of it is also maybe being very aware of the places where I am, especially when I'm spending extended periods of time there, or I am living there, or even traveling there. I mean, I like to try to, even when I'm a tourist and I know I'm a tourist and I'm admitting I'm a tourist, I like to try to be less of a tourist. You know what I mean? In the sense of sort of hiding myself, if you will, and really just being part of whatever it is. And so, like, not staying in fancy American hotels in Panama. My husband's family is from Panama, so we've gone there multiple times. I'm thinking of when we travel in Panama, we stay at these little, out of the way Panamanian hotels. One time we went to like a resort and he was like livid. I hate this, you know. So you know what I mean? Like just sort of and really taking in and appreciating the culture, the people, the rest of the natural world, right? That is there around me.
Yeah.
And so absorbing it as much as I can, learning about it before I go there and after, and taking it in, and I guess then that comes out in the poetry. Yes, I've lived in the Midwest all my life, and usually on the Great Lakes, on Lake Michigan. So you will see Lake Michigan entering, you will see a lot of snow in my poems, a lot of forest imagery,
Mhm.
right? Because it's woodlands, and so yeah, I think that in that way it's very important, but Mexico shows up as well, even though I never lived there. My grandparents migrated from Mexico. But, you know, I've been many times, and I always have their stories. Of course, as is so common with immigrants who they went back to visit, but they never moved back. And as is so common, they thought that it stayed. You know, my grandmother would be like, well, she's from Jacona, Michoacan, and she would thought Jacona was forever this tiny little town that looked like it looked when she was 16. Right? I'm like, grandma doesn't look don't tell her that. Right? And so, and you know what, my grandfather came from Mazamitla, Jalisco,
Mhm.
which is in the up in the mountains.
Mhm.
And so it actually had foliage and fauna similar to the Midwest.
Oh.
He had a relative that came before him. It's a long story, but I try to make it short. His brother, Jesus, came before him but went to California and was working as a migrant worker in the fields. And there happened to be this German doctor from Milwaukee who was there doing, at that time, doctors had to do some kind of community service as part of their, I don't know what, right?
Service.
Yes. And so he was, that doctor was out there tending to the migrant workers when they fell ill. And my great uncle got sick, and that doctor helped heal him. And the doctor liked him because he thought he was smart. And he said, if you want to come with me, went back to Milwaukee, I'll make you my apprentice. And I'll see to it that you get an education, not like we think of education,
Yeah.
to the 8th grade, right?
Yes.
And so Jesus followed him back there and was writing letters to the rest of the family back in Jalisco saying, it's just like home here. There's pine trees. I mean, winter here was not, but the pine trees and the this and the that, it was similar, he was telling them. So they all got on a train in the late 20s
Wow.
and they were come to Wisconsin. Jesus went back to Mexico,
Mm.
but they came and they missed the stop for Milwaukee. And they got, by accident, they got off in Detroit, and a bunch of them just stayed there. So we have this Rivera part of the family some of them are still in Detroit, some have passed on, and the others got back on the train and headed back for Milwaukee, and that's how we landed there. But, you know, I think, you know, when poems are set in Mexico, it's coming from the stories. My grandfather was a phenomenal storyteller, as was one of my aunties, and I think I get being a writer partly from that. But also, you know, they made place so vivid
Yeah.
that then I had to travel there.
Yeah.
I know that's a kind of not a great answer to
No,
that
no, that's a
question, but
fantastic answer. No, it started making me think about like, oh wow, I didn't realize that I wanted to be a poet, that I wanted to be a storyteller until my parents took me when I was 12 years old to El Cometa, Michoacan, which is where my
uh
dad grew up. It's a tiny little ranch. No streets, no roads. They dug a road into the side of this tall giant hill. There's like caves. My parents would make me drink the water off the stalactite.
wow.
There's tar pits everywhere.
Oh.
And like we would go hiking and we would do all these things. And it was like that's when I became a person. That's when
Uh-huh.
I became a writer. That's
Mm.
when I started telling stories to my family. It was to my family in Mexico. And it's so amazing how like you're also talking about how like we kind of like, as people that are like, first, second, third generation
Mm.
establishing ourselves in the United States, we don't really try to reconnect to Mexico or to like
Mhm.
these places where our family and our ancestors came from. And like I have this big plan. I don't know if
Mm.
my husband will love it, but it's a plan. I want to move to Cuernavaca, Mexico, and I want to
Oh.
get certified as a curandera. There's this institute called the Centro de Desarrollo para la Humanidad. And I know a curandera from Albuquerque, New Mexico. She got certified there. And
Ah.
she actually did like a risa terapia on me. And she put this
Wow.
conch over my body and she took me into her tomescal.
Uh,
And it was an enriching experience.
uh-huh, I
But
bet. I stayed in Cuernavaca for 4 months once. Mhm.
it's beautiful,
Yeah, it
isn't it?
is beautiful.
Oh,
Like, city of eternal spring,
oh yes.
right?
Yes.
With the
Oh.
flores everywhere.
And it's so close to
And
Mexico City.
yes, yeah. Oh, something you were saying made me think of something that was really significant but I've lost it. That's what being 63 does. Is it if it comes back, I'll tell you.
Okay, no, fabulous, fabulous. Oh, okay. I'm actually super curious about this next question I want to
Mhm,
ask you. So, your work makes me think of writing as a kind of companionship with other art forms.
mhm.
And I want to know, have you ever had an artist respond back to your ekphrastic work?
Yeah.
Yes, you have?
I mean, well, the Blues Tree poem, which is one of my favorites that I read last night,
Yes.
is that, I was in conversation quite a while with that artist
Mhm.
and knew him well, and he asked me to write that poem, but not just write a poem, right?
Mhm.
And he, responded and how happy he was with how the poem, you know, included so much of the culture of that area and even had him in it, trying to figure out how to paint, that something. And he just was really thrilled with it. I remember his response. So yes, I mean those that are still alive. Oh, and Roy Stab in Milwaukee.
Yes, you've
He
written so
didn't
much in response.
he didn't even know, I was doing this, and somehow somebody told him, and I was doing a reading, and he showed up at it, and he was just thrilled, right? And then he sent the poems that I had written in conversation with his work to other places, and one of them was put on a wall I don't remember exactly where, but it was like somewhere in the Far East with,
Really?
it was put somewhere among his work, or it was read at a symposium about his work. I think this might have been China, right? So yeah, I have had responses, from the artists. I love that when they're still alive, I mean, of course, when they've passed on, you don't have that, but I like to think that somehow they know.
I love that. I love that sentiment. Another question I wanted to ask you, two poems that really stood out to me in your repertoire was the poem Turning, and I think that's in
Mm,
Boomerang, and
yeah.
Trespassing, which is
Mm,
in Trace, due to the fact that they're very implicit about activism.
mhm.
And I wanted to know, how does activism play a role in your poetry or just as, a person in your personality?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because last night at dinner, the group that was there somehow brought up zodiac signs.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, I'm Libra. And they said, well, do you feel like you fit it? And I said, yes, because Libra's the scales and it's all about justice. You know what I mean? Like
Mm,
my concern for justice is very strong. And my concern for equality and giving everyone equal opportunity. I don't believe that the 1% should have everything and everybody else should be groveling at
mm,
their heels. You know what I mean? And my beliefs are very strong there. Can't I mean, what kind of world is it to live in otherwise? And so I've always engaged in activism from like tame, what I consider tame activism, like, get out the vote,
mhm.
texting to get people to vote, souls to the polls, driving people to the polls, to protests. I haven't done a lot of illegal stuff, except in that one poem, I'm trespassing
Yeah.
on the land that they're gonna mine, right? And yeah, but for the most part, some pretty vivacious protests, that I've been part of, those used to work. They don't work anymore because the powers that be just ignore them. So really the only thing they're good for, and I think it's important, they're good for keeping the solidarity of the people who are resisting and keeping because you feel like you're banging your head against the wall sometimes, so keeping us, together, alive, awake. I'll use that dirty word, woke. And, so yeah, so I it's always been that's always been really important to me and will always be. I'll always get involved in activism, and there's little that I detest more than, like, what I call champagne Marxists who talk the talk and write these fancy, you know, scholarly papers on this stuff, but then won't join a union
Yeah.
or won't get out there at all. And it's like, I just believe that if you believe these things, act on them.
Yeah.
If you're going to write about them and make your living off of them, act on them. That doesn't mean that I think everybody needs to be an activist in the same way. Not at all. Because there's multiple way we need multiple people, doing multiple different things to make change, and we need to be strategic about it, especially now because the old ways, like I said, don't work. And so yes, so sometimes it makes its way into my poetry, and that is another way to resist. Now the problem is who reads poetry, right? Is are the folks whose minds we're trying to change reading poetry? Not a lot of them, but you never know. Sometimes you might go be like in my job as poet laureate. I'm in all these little towns, farm towns out in the middle of nowhere, and people come
Mhm.
and, I will read some of those poems. I approach it gently. I don't yell at people, and, when you approach humor is a great way to approach it because you get people laughing, it can make them think and it can change minds. But so, so yeah, I mean, it's one kind of activism. And I would be so bold as to say today, with all the silencing that's going on and the banning and all of that that's happening, simply to write at all
Yeah.
as a person of color is an act of resistance. And especially to write about these issues,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Mm.
So,
And I'm really glad that you brought up your role as Wisconsin State Poet Laureate because my next question has to do with that. Latinx poets have often redefined ekphrasis in terms of promoting visibility and community, very
mhm,
similar to what you were talking about in activism. And this is making me think about a seminar I attended where we were learning about the ways to do active learning strategies in the classroom. And there's dialogue, debate, discussion, but a new one that they've added is demonstration, which is just attending protests,
mhm,
building unity, promoting community, finding people that you can build a coalition with, people to interact with, people to talk with, people that don't necessarily agree with you, but people that you can like at least meet on a first base level.
mhm.
And so I wanted to know, what does all of this mean now for you, especially in your current role as the Wisconsin State Poet Laureate? Like, how do you see your role specifically within like activism and building community now that you're in such a high position in your state?
Well, I mean, in that position, you also have to be careful, right? I mean, to a degree. And I remember when they first gave me the role, the head of the Poet Laureate Commission saying something about, don't advertise it if you're doing political readings, because she saw I was doing some reading that was all political, the whole
Mm.
thing was. And I said, then you hired the wrong person. Don't hire me to do that. I say hire, I mean, I don't get paid.
Yeah.
We get a stipend of $3,000 a year, and my whole $3,000 went to building the website for my project, right?
Okay.
So we
Mhm.
don't get paid. But, I said, that I'm not the poet laureate. I'm not the person to bring into this if, not, I won't be in someone's face. I won't be crude. And she backed down, and I went to do a reading for it's the Wisconsin Fellowship of Poets.
Mm.
So they really love their poet laureate, whoever it is, like that's their poet laureate is their reina or their, you know what I mean? And so, and I read some of my more political poems and I said, I'm sorry, but I'm not the poet laureate to shut up about this. They all cheered.
Mm.
They cheered. They wanted to see, they wanted somebody to speak out. But I lost the question now. Oh, how am I don't know if I kind of answered it. Also, I think I answered it a little bit before when I said using
Yeah.
humor,
Mhm.
approaching it gently, but also being honest
Mhm.
about what it is,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That we're talking about.
And I like that you're super authentic. The first time I met you at dinner,
Mhm.
and like based off of the interview as well, when I saw your interview, the interview you
Uh,
initially did 10 years ago with Letras Latinas, I was like, this is such an educated poet. I
oh.
am so intimidated to meet this person in real life. And then when I met you, you were so kind, so outgoing. You had all these wonderful stories, and like chisme with you is just feels great.
Oh, that's so
So
sweet.
so no, like authenticity, I think, is something that so many people, especially this younger generation, is too scared of doing. They're
Yeah.
too scared to be vulnerable. They're too scared to lean into the cringe, so to speak.
Uh-huh.
That's something I've noticed. And so like no,
Oh,
like
yeah.
you're reminding me that like, oh, I need to just, lean more into my personality a little.
Mhm. I think part of that is that everything is so mediated now.
Oh yeah.
This is always between us, right? This instrument, this telephone that's become part of our bodies, I think is a problem. And I think that we need a lot more face to face, this like I heard someone call it radical faciality. At one point, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, no, and, I've been steadily making steps to do that. I've steadily been
Uh-huh.
making steps to get rid of this tablet, to get rid of this phone next to me. I've gotten rid of social media. I've only kept WhatsApp to stay in
Wow.
communication with my mother because she
Mhm.
uses WhatsApp a lot.
Mhm.
And, I've noticed that I go to bed early now, and I've
Mhm.
noticed that I wake up early now. I rise with the sun,
Mhm.
and, I'm not so bogged down by a lot of the news. Sometimes I think it's important to have a little distance from the news, to
Mhm.
not be so reactionary to, like, what's coming out, because
Mhm.
then we start getting all these rumors. We start getting all this misinformation. I think letting it kind of sink into the community and then kind of engaging with the community is the best way to kind of interact with the world, but also to learn more about myself and to not be influenced by others.
That's so
Mhm.
thoughtful.
I'm even the last step is to get a pink Motorola flip phone.
Uh-huh. There you go.
Go
There you
back to the
go.
old school.
Going back to your question too about community work and
Mhm.
etc. I also have long been involved with an organization called Woodland Pattern in Milwaukee, which is a multi-arts organization that's largest focus is the literary arts and poetry, but they do all the arts. And it's very community centric. I mean, this is not an academic institution. And, I'm on their board of directors now, but I've played all kinds of volunteer roles there. And it's so much about reaching out to the broadest, spectrum of humanity and, you know, diversity and all different kinds of people, bringing all different kinds of poets, we talk diversity in terms of style and
Yeah.
aesthetic and all of that, and getting as many people in the doors. And so that's another way in which I feel like I do that. They have this wonderful event annually. It's their big fundraiser that they call the Poetry Marathon. And it's 2 days of all like morning till night, people reading no more than 5 minutes a piece. But the people who are reading are like a marathon runner. So we raise money. Like, if you run a marathon for a cause, you ask people to contribute, like put, in your name, you're going to run 10 miles and they're going to contribute whatever per mile.
Mhm.
It's the same thing. The poets go out themselves and they get sponsors, and then that raises money for this not for profit, right? And it's just a beautiful community event. People come from all over the Midwest, and they have it partially online now so that people can tap in from all over the world.
Wow, that
Mhm.
is amazing.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, now we're gonna move into the second half of the interview.
Okay.
We spent a long time on the first half, so
I'm
I
sorry.
am gonna shorten the second half a little bit,
Yeah.
but
You
this is my
have a
favorite part.
you have a talker here.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about your two collections, Boomerang and Trace. But before we get into that, I wanted us to kind of break away from the usual structure of these Letras Latinas interviews, and I
Uh,
want us to do a little interactive thing. So
okay.
I have my fancy dandy Notre Dame folder, and inside of it, I have a piece of cardstock paper, 8 by 11 inches. That's for you.
Thank you.
And I have a pack of Crayola,
Okay, great.
color pencils,
Thank you.
and I have the same for me. And I'm going to give you this folder so that way you can use
Oh,
it.
thank you.
But I wanted us to do a little creative project together so that way we can learn a little bit more about each other.
Okay.
I do this a lot with my students and it's really fun.
Oh,
But I want us to, on this sheet of paper, answer the following question.
okay.
If we were to map our journey as poets visually, whether as like a mural or a film reel, what would some of the key images be?
If we were to map our poetry, say it again?
Yeah, if we were to map our journey as a
Our
poet
journey.
visually, what key images would there be?
Okay.
Yeah. And so we'll be multitasking. We will be doing that on the page
Okay.
while I continue the interview.
Oh, wow. Wow, wow. Okay.
This is something I've seen so many people do, and I thought it'd be so fun.
And as much as I love art, I can't draw my way out of anything, which is probably why I appreciate so much what others can do.
Yeah, no, same with me. So, the first question I want to ask you while we draw. In Boomerang, the title itself suggests both a return and departure.
Uh-huh.
How did that concept shape the structure of this collection?
In Boomerang, A Return and Departure. Oh, yeah.
'Cause I was mesmerized by the image or the at least the idea, the motion of flicking your wrist,
Yes.
having the boomerang come out, and then, coming back again, and there's, like, this act of trust, not just between
Mhm.
you, but the boomerang itself
Yes.
coming back to you.
Right, well, exactly what I was thinking. Part of it was there are some sassy poems in here, as in sassy as in when we were talking about, like, socio-political work, right? And so I was thinking at first of a boomerang as, like, right back at you, right? That's part of what I was thinking
That's
about. But
nice.
I was also thinking about, um, moving away, right, from our home. I don't only mean physically, like, not just moving physically from one state to another, but our home base, our people, our familia, our cultura, moving out from that, away from that, gathering all kinds of other things, and then coming back. Like, there's always that return home. And in the structure of this book, it's the end of the book where there are all of these kind of childhood poems about childhood and about home as a child and about familia, right? So I that was partly what I was thinking.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Oh, gosh, I love that. No, I especially love the fact that you point out that it was more like of a gotcha kind of
Yeah.
thing. I wasn't seeing that. I was seeing it more as, like, aesthetic. I was like, "Wow, is the boomerang gonna come back?" Oh,
Yeah,
that's
but it does come
fantastic.
back. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
yeah. Uh-huh.
No, and then Boomerang has such intense sound play that Juan Felipe
Yeah.
Herrera, who did the introduction for your collection, Boomerang,
Yeah.
he described your verse as sonic calligraphy, which I just thought was, like, fantastic.
Uh-huh.
And it's so noticeable in poems like Sound Waves and,
Yeah.
Poema para los Tuntunteros.
Uh-huh.
Like, it comes out and then I was so shocked to find out that I think it was Poema para los Tuntunteros,
Mm.
sheet music was made for that and performed at Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
That's that was
Yeah.
that's fantastic, like, that's a poet's dream.
Yeah, that was actually one of the most amazing things that's ever happened to me in terms of my life as my life period, my life as a poet, but to have this composer get his hands on this poem, God knows how, because he was out in California, and then write this choral music, and then it becomes a score with my words, it becomes published, and then, yes, the National Concert Choir performed it at Carnegie Hall, along with a bunch of other it was part of an evening of actually, you know what the title for the whole evening of music was? I Choose Love. That was the title for the whole program that night. And what they had what it was a program of choral music where the music was coming from all different cultures, and this piece was part of it. And I'm sitting there in the audience in Carnegie Hall watching. It was a huge choir. I don't remember how many people were in it,
Yeah.
but, like, more than 50. And to hear them singing my words to this fantastic music, I mean, I gotta give the composer all the credit,
Mm.
but it was just I I've never experienced anything like that. And you're right, it's a dream come true, and it's partly a dream come true because poetry then is going out beyond just other poets or literary scholars or writers. So often our work is really just being read by each other.
Mm.
And I think, like, that's lovely to have these exchanges with each other, but I want for everybody, for all our poets and writers, an audience of readers who they don't always have to be writers, right? Readers and listeners, because then what do we have? We have a more literate society, and so I think all the time about these stories about how you can be somewhere in Latin America in the small dusty town, and you could walk into a cantina and sit down, and people will recite you Pablo Neruda from memory. But here, people don't even know who their poet laureate of the United States is.
Yeah, no.
So, I mean, yeah, right? That's
That is yeah, no, that is yeah. I remember when I told my students I had done the introduction for the then United States Poet Laureate Ada Limon, they were
yeah,
like, "Who's that?"
she's so fabulous.
She is
So fabulous.
amazing.
Yeah.
Moving on, where I wanna enter into Trace a little bit. In
Okay.
Trace, the body and the landscape often reflect and reshape each other, which I thought was fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big fan of Ana Mendieta's work, and I
Yeah.
feel like you do a lot of that naturally, whether you're responding to her work or not. And, for example, your poem Ghost Species, has this
Ah,
sense of the animal dead still walking with us on like this
yeah,
landscape that's kind of been taken over by like a city.
yeah.
Yeah. And so, do you see the word trace as an encompassing metaphor for migration and displacement? Or is it more as like a literal truth about how humans are continuous with their environments, or rather, and this is like what I'm kind of leaning towards, how the environment is continuous even without us?
I think it's all of that, and it was also me thinking about the way in which every being on this planet leaves its trace, right? Every being leaves its trace. Every being somehow becomes absorbed into the other beings around it and the beings that come after it, right? I mean, we carry the traces of our parents, our grandparents, our abuelos, or all of that, right? And I believe that animals and plants do that too. There's been studies that trees literally, well, not literally isn't the right word, but trees talk to each other.
Yes.
They actually have systems of communication, right? So it's partly that, and then it's also when you think about a lot of the ephemeral art in the book, that art is Ana Mendieta, for example,
Oh, yeah.
is about leaving a trace,
Mm,
right? That
yes.
she's putting a trace in the land, you know? Or if you think about migration, it's that as well. That journey, right, leaves a trace, creates a trace. And I feel like my book is not a project book, meaning that it's not woven together. It's not like not all the poems are about one subject. And I love those books. I appreciate those books where the poet researches, this topic, and the whole book is all interwoven so intricately. This is not that. The poems are tied together by kind of larger philosophical comments,
Mhm.
or comments, larger philosophical ideas, right? That I was mentioning before. And so I felt like Trace kind of could encumber that, this notion of transformation, change, liminal space, if that makes sense.
No, no,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. And then I was also struck by how Trace moves between grief and levity. As moments of
Yeah.
mourning I mean, as moments of mourning and activism sit alongside sensory beauty and
Mhm.
humor and song. For example, in Because We Come From Everything, the collage poem that the band
Yeah.
authors,
Yeah.
there's a deep awareness of loss and erasure that's happening there. But there's also this insistence on joy, this
Mm,
insistence on resilience, this insistence on cultural abundance
mm.
that it resonated with me deeply. How do you think about that balance when you're writing? Do you begin from grief and move toward levity, or are they always in conversation from the start?
I think they're always in
Mhm.
conversation because it's not a linear process, right? When we experience grief, yes, there are ways in which over time that the weight of it maybe, I don't know if it becomes less heavy or it just shifts. There's this wonderful poem. I'm blanking on the poet's name now. It'll come to me maybe. There's this wonderful poem that the entire poem is about carrying a box,
Mm.
and it's a heavy box, and in the poem, the speaker is, like, moving it around. Imagine walking with this box, and first it's on his hip, and then it's on his shoulder, and then he's carrying it in front of him like that, and then he's shifting it over here, and then at the end of the poem, he says, "And then I learned you or I or whatever it is, learn how to carry it learn how to carry it something without ever putting it down." And when you go back and you look at the title of the poem, it's Mashiko Dead. Jack Gilbert is the poet. Mashiko was his wife. And when you see Mashiko dead, you understand that this box is grief, right? And that it's so heavy you have to shift it. And you're never going to put it down, but you learn how to live with it. But I think there's always a back and forth, right? It becomes lighter sometimes. You can forget, or you can even feel joy in your memories of whatever was lost, right? But then there's are always going to be moments where it's all of a sudden going to feel so heavy again. Because, when we lose someone or something, and by that I don't mean physical objects, but, something profound, it's with us our whole lives.
No, it's
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's very poignant, yeah.
Yeah.
No, when I lost my grandma, she was the only reason I had any ties or connections to Mexico, and now that she's gone, I've kind of lost that sense of myself. And for
Mhm.
me, I had to write this poem, and, it was difficult. It's like I want to, respect my grandma, and, I'm in the United States. I'm, like, over 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 miles away from her.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't even go there and be there for the burial. I'm here. It was my
Yeah.
first year in grad school. It's my
Yes.
third year now. And so I've had a lot of time to process it. But every time I've tried going onto the page, there hasn't been any way to write a poem, from either from her perspective or about her. It's like it's too direct, too personal. And so I had to ultimately I was like, I need to get this out of my system. And so I wrote a poem in her voice. And without context, no one would ever know it. But I think, I'm happy with that. I think I'm happy knowing that the
Mhm.
voice of this poem, the poet in like the speaker of this poem
Mhm.
is my grandma. And she's saying a prayer to La Virgen that sits on the border. And I'm really proud of that poem. And like I do hope one day to go and visit her grave and to
Mhm.
maybe leave it there
Mhm.
because she gave me so much. She was the
Mhm.
reason I'm even here in grad school.
Mhm. I hear you. I hear you. And yeah, it takes time with grief. Not, I don't only mean to move through it, but to write about things like that. Sometimes they're just too present. And when we try to write about them, it becomes too morose or too schmaltzy or whatever, right? And we need some time, we need some distance before we can actually put that down on paper.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, and then many of the poems in Boomerang and Trace engage ghosts and deities and
Mm,
ancestral figures. For example, the invocation of Ixchel in Cien Nombres para la Muerte, La
mm.
Hilacha, the loose thread. And I wanted to know what draws you to these mythic and ancestral presences. And do you see them as a form of companionship or as a way of making visible what history or dominant culture often erases?
Oh, yes, both of those
Mhm.
things. Both of those things. What is erased? Also, I love that notion of companionship. And I think they also, again, liminal spaces, right? The between spaces between living here on this planet and, life and death, living on this planet and living in some other realm, right? There's that, it's again part of that. It's a moment of transformation. And so I think for all of those reasons, yeah, those figures. You mentioned which figures was it again you had in the question?
That you mentioned ghosts,
Ghosts,
deities,
yeah.
ancestral figures.
Yeah, and I think deities and ancestral figures too, that's again, oftentimes that's the sort of indigenous part of our culture that is so often erased. It's this irony where both in the United States and in Latin America, where there's this grand celebration of the indigenous, there's these huge museums. And yet at the same time, right, there's this relegating of the indigenous to the poorest parts of the country, right? And they're having to fight and struggle for their water rights. And I mean, this was a distant relative, right? Distant relative. So I'm not trying to claim anything major. But my grandfather said till the day he died, when he was on his deathbed, that we were related to Lázaro Cárdenas. He was like a second cousin to my grandfather. And, he was the president of Mexico. He was in the 1930s, he was the one who was fighting to give water rights back to the indigenous. And so, and he was like very much, the United States hated him, thought it was a communist because he was like nationalizing Mexico's oil industry and stuff. I'm, like, so proud that he was my ancestor, but he was beloved in Mexico, right, as a president. And so I think so often, those mythic figures that you find, are we can't forget that part of who we are. We don't wanna forget the indigenous and we don't wanna forget the African in who we are,
No,
and there's huge denial in Mexico about the African element, and, I mean, take a trip to Veracruz and tell me there's not an African strain, and then say,
yeah,
I mean,
no,
Africa is everywhere.
no, no.
So,
Mhm.
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
when I got married to my husband, he's white. He grew
Mhm.
up here in the United States.
Mm.
He's related to the Abigail from the Salem witch trials. He's
Wow.
he's related to one of the U.S. presidents. He's related to that lady that butchered her husband, like,
Oh,
what was it? Sally Border? I don't
oh,
remember.
yeah, I know what you
Yeah,
mean.
no, yeah,
I know what
he's
you mean.
related to so many people
Yeah.
in United States history. It's
Mm,
insane, and then I don't have that. I don't
uh,
have that connection to history, like, nothing has really been saved or traced in my family, but, like, my dad, if he grows his hair out, it's an afro, and it's
uh-huh,
beautiful. He
uh-huh,
loves getting dreads,
uh-huh.
but I remember when my abuelita was still alive, and he went to go visit her, and, I had encouraged my father to lean in more to, like, being who he was and being proud of the way his hair was, because he was always bullied about it.
Yeah.
This little pueblito where everyone would make fun of you if you looked a little different, they'd call him chino. And,
Uh-huh.
I remember he came back and his dreads were gone, and I was like,
Uh,
"Wow, what happened? Where are your dreads?" And he's like, "Oh, my mom, she didn't like it. She didn't like it." And so
yeah,
now he hasn't really gone back into doing that, but I miss when my dad, you know, leaned into his roots a little bit and
yeah,
to, like, I do have this in me,
right,
and,
yeah.
I know it's there, but there's also this sense of, like, shame and humiliation in the family
Mhm.
that doesn't really allow him to kind of have that space.
My husband, his family is all from Panama. He has very curly hair.
Yeah.
And it's long, and when we're in Panama, it dreads. It just dreads from the humidity.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
nothing he can do. Yeah.
Okay, well, we only have about 4 to 5 minutes left.
And, you have a lot of questions I didn't
No,
answer it.
actually, we're actually doing really well on time.
Oh,
I just
good.
wanna remind you to keep
Yeah,
going,
okay, okay.
but, some final questions and thoughts that I kind of wanted to bring up. I mean, if you could offer one piece of advice to a younger poet who feels skeptical of ekphrasis as I once did, what would you tell them?
What would I tell them? I think it's okay to be I think it's okay to be skeptical, at first, and especially, you know, well, especially if they're not really drawn to visual art. But I would say, probably say, give it a chance in the sense of read different poets who are doing it, read different, poems that are taking different approaches to this form. And maybe read an article or two that's been written about it or this mode, right? So that you see that it isn't just describing what somebody else already did. If all I did was describe a painting in a poem, I wouldn't write the poem because we might as well just go look at the painting. It's not that. It's not mimesis, right? It's lending context to this piece, whether it's the artist's autobiographical content, whether it's cultural context, whether it's historical context. It's lending context. It's looking at it from one particular perspective or multiple perspectives, and it's interpreting so that somebody can look at that art and read that poem and say, "Oh, I see why poet X interpreted it this way, but I see it differently. If I were to write the poem, I would do this." And you'll see that. You'll see if you have multiple people writing a conversation with the same piece, there'll be very, very different poems, which teaches us something about interpretation. And that can be of literature, of art, of music, of anything, and how we bring who we are and all of our own baggage. And I don't mean that necessarily in a negative way
Mhm.
to our viewing or our reading, right? And there's something to be learned from that. So I would say stay open enough
Mm,
to at least look a little bit at the possibilities of what this mode can do.
okay. And now I want us to share what we've drawn. I know you still need to work on it, so
Oh,
I will
mine
share first.
stinks. Yeah.
And I know the prompt I gave, it's such a beautiful prompt. Like if you could draw like your journey as a poet, like what would be the key moments?
Yeah.
I'm a rule breaker. I did not draw key moments. I drew
Yeah.
key people and animals.
Oh,
So
cool.
I drew my dad.
Oh, you can draw
Oh,
some.
you think?
Better than me. I have
I
stick figures.
I drew my dad, Juan Carlos. I drew my mom, Leticia Maravilla.
Mm,
And I drew my 2 cats because I always have these people as characters in my poetry no matter how much I try not to. I can't go away from, like, my father and some of, the good moments and the bad moments I've had with him because, like,
mhm.
we see eye to eye sometimes, but we also fight
Yeah, of
really
course.
well. So I
Mhm.
have them in red on
Uh-huh.
squigglies. And then my mom, she's in, like, an orange ray because
Uh,
my mother has always been very spiritual and has always been there in terms of, like, my health and in my education. She's always been super supportive. And then, this is my cat,
oh.
Bratwurst Infinita, Priscilla Maravilla. That's her full name.
Bratwurst?
Bratwurst.
Oh my God, you're talking my language, Wisconsin.
Yeah, no, I as a Mexican family, we wanted to try bratwurst out, and she came and she stole one of the sausages off me. And I was like, that's how she entered the family. She was a thief. Yeah, no. And I'm a big Elvis fan, so I named her after Elvis's wife, Priscilla. And Infinita, because she's never gonna die. And then she had a daughter. And she is actually the love of my life. She is the grumpiest kitty in the world. She will not love you. She's actually really creepy. If I sleep, my sister would come in and check on me because it was my sister's job to make sure I could breathe at night, because Lola would sit on my chest and she would just stare at me, and she would be like, she would be breathing real hard just watching me. Yeah, but her full name is Dolores Ofelia Maravilla. She's always sad. It seems like she's always in pain. But yeah, no, I write about my cats, I write about my parents, and I use them as ways of kind of finding a new voice within the poem, but also kind of navigating my own voice.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Like, I didn't think that deeply about this. This is terrible because it's here I am, the lover of art, and I have stick figures. I couldn't even really draw them like sitting down or anything. But this is me and my auntie, my tia Elia, heart of my heart, second mother to me. My mother is a lovely human being, and I love her too. But I had two moms. I grew up with two moms. My auntie couldn't have children of her own, and she took to me like, we lived in it was a two flat. They lived down, we lived up. And when my parents finally bought their own house and we moved away, we were only moving 5 minutes away.
Oh.
But I didn't know that as a child. And I was just beside myself that we were moving away. And my aunt and uncle actually asked my mom and dad if they could have me. My mom said, "We can't give you our child, but I'll bring her over all the time." So, but anyway, my auntie, she has a book here because she would make me these blank books. So she would take paper, it was always recycled from something, and she would, put it, punch holes and put it together, bind it with yarn or bind it with something. And she would give me these blank books and she would say, "Here, you write your stories in here. You draw in here." And she actually taught me how to draw like shoulders. I could have done this better, right? How to and she would have me write my little stories and do my little stuff in there.
And then what's that in the middle?
That's supposed to be the high school newspaper where I had my first poem published.
That's fantastic.
The Bayview Compass. I went to Bayview High School. And that's my first poem was published in the school newspaper. And at the editor, I didn't know her well then because we ran in different crowds. But she is now my best friend. She's been my best friend for 45 years, 40 years, something like that, right? So that's that. This is now high school, college learning.
Oh,
This is supposed to be writing and learning, reading.
fantastic.
Reading is a big part of writing.
Yeah.
So reading and also like learning to write. And this is supposed to be like a forest because I love walking in a forest or in the woods. I love taking in the flora, the fauna, the air, everything around me. And I often get ideas for poems when I'm doing that, and they start gestating in my head. And so that's a part of my creative process, but anyway.
So we're about time,
Oh,
but I actually wanted you to do something for me.
okay.
I am in the middle of my exams.
Uh,
And when I read this stanza, it was just this stanza in the opening of your poem, Shipping and Receiving,
uh-huh.
I felt liberated. And I was wondering if you could just read that stanza for me
You bet.
right here, just the first stanza.
Yeah, that poem is fun. Okay. Sick of fumbling with lunch sack, purse, umbrella, mask, keys, and the 2-ton backpack overflowing with unread essays, laptop discussion posts, poems caught in the jammed zipper, I slam it all down on the kitchen table and declare to the dog that I quit. I will never again work anywhere that sends me home to work even harder all weekend long. End of story. Period. Punto. Ya. I decide to shift.
Thank you. When
You're
I read
welcome.
that, I was like, I wish.
Yeah, I mean, that was just, This is one of those poems about after having taught for so long, just be like, "Oh, can I grade another paper for the life of me?"
Well, that's the end of this interview. Thank you so much for coming and for participating, and thank you to all those that are watching.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's just so lovely and so smart. I really appreciate having this conversation with
Yeah,
you.
me too.
Mm.